Earlier in Checkpoint, we looked at the rapidly diminishing number of bank branches in New Zealand. In the past month, 26 have been announced as closing, 19 by Westpac, 7 by ANZ, including the news we broke tonight that the bank in Milton is to close. And Checkpoint understands there are more to come. Hokitika under review and more too. Many are in small towns. Some are the only bank branches in those towns. Westpac and ANZ are part of Australian companies which reported combined profits of over 6 billion Australian dollars for the first 6 months of the financial year. That's seen the union representing banking staff and mayors in a number of the towns losing their banks, telling us there is a social obligation of some description to keep banks open where there is nowhere else to go in a town. The banks themselves have repeatedly refused to talk to us about this and about how many more branches will close. So too has the Banking Association. But Dr. David Tripe is a banking expert at Massey University, and he says this is the reality of the internet age. As more and more people bank online, fewer physical branches are needed, and branches in our smaller communities are increasingly not paying their way.
What is going on is that we are seeing the gradual shrinkage of bank branch networks, just as we are seeing the gradual shrinkage of other retail stores from smaller towns and shopping centres. So it's not necessarily a concerted process, it's just gradually happening as people take up other channels. It's not, and some of the bank branch closures are of the only bank in town. Many of the others are not in that situation. And once again, some of these are just difficult to operate and a nuisance to operate and probably relatively costly to operate. So I'm not going to criticise the banks for closing them, because over the next 15, 20 years, we're going to see a lot more in the way of bank branch closures.
Because the world is changing, and because
the world is changing. Yes.
Right.
Okay. So we don't actually complain when Whitcoulls closes down a branch.
No, we don't. But David, and look, I don't want to make you an apologist for the banks, because you are an academic and you are entirely independent and you don't work for any of them. But Whitcoulls didn't have a first half profit of 3.7 billion Australian dollars, did they?
No,
I mean,
no.
Doesn't that mean that we can require more of these guys because they have money? It's not as if they are walking near the edge of the cliff. And the other thing is, so much of their rhetoric is based upon connectivity with New Zealand, with the community, a sense of nationalism, a sense of engagement. Aren't they required at some level to put their money where their mouth is?
I've actually quite long discussed the issue of whether there is an implicit social contract with the banks. So the real question is whether having a network of branches in out-of-the-way places is actually supporting the contract, that implicit social contract. Now, the story for Ranfurly and Fairlie is probably different from pretty well all the other situations where Westpac's closing branches. Now, what tends to happen when bank branches close in places like that is that, in fact, retailers and others in the community work out a system for themselves. Sometimes the departing bank will put a structure in place. Now, I seem to recall that when the National Bank closed a branch in Mangataroto in Northland in the late 1990s, they actually set up a structure for the local community to be able to access some form of banking services. But within about a year or two, the local community, to a large extent, lost interest in that, and they found that they didn't actually need that in the same sort of way. So, it's nice for banks to have branch networks. It's nice to have contact with them, but I'm not sure that it's really doing much good for either the bank, and it's not really necessarily saving a lot for the community.
And that's that.
Well, I'm open to argument, but I also think that we're going to see a lot more bank branch closures, and I don't actually think that when it comes to the crunch, most of us will be that aggrieved about it. And quite frankly, the odd occasions when I do go into bank branches, I'm amazed by what people are doing in there, and actually very, very little of what they do is actually adding any value to the bank in terms of linking them to a revenue stream or providing service to a customer which might not be provided in some other way.
Dr. David Tripe from Massey University. We've tried, as we've said repeatedly, to talk to the banks. We've tried repeatedly, and it's frustrating because they have large media departments and we wonder what they're for if they don't want to talk to the media. You can sense my exasperation, but really and truly none of them are fronting, and nor is the Bankers Association.